There is a place where the wind carries stories instead of storms. A place most maps forget and most hearts remember only in dreams. Far past the cliffs that bleed into the sea, beyond where the gulls tire of flight, there rests a tiny weather-beaten house, curled up like a seashell on the edge of the world. In that house lives a man. He's neither old nor young, just somewhere in between, like the moon caught between waxing and waning. His name is Elias, though no one's spoken it aloud in a long time. He is the lantern keeper. Each night, just as the sun kisses the sea goodnight, Elias climbs the spiral steps of the old lighthouse that leans like an old storyteller remembering too much. At the very top, he lights the great lantern, not for ships, not anymore. There haven't been ships here in decades. He lights it for the stars, because in this part of the world, the stars listen. Elias doesn't speak much, not because he can't, but because silence has become his language. The crackling of the fire, the shuffle of boots on wooden planks, the distant howl of a patient sea. These are the voices he's grown used to. But there is one thing he says aloud every night, just before striking the match. For her, in case she remembers. No one knows who she is. Not the crows that sit like sentries on the cliff. Not the cat that sleeps near the hearth twitching her ears at dreams. Not even the sea, though it tries every night to whisper her name through waves and winds. The lighthouse lantern doesn't burn with ordinary flame. It glows with a soft, golden warmth like memory or lullabies, and when Elias lights it, something shifts in the sky. Clouds drift slower, stars gather closer, and sometimes, only sometimes, the wind changes direction, as if trying to carry the light somewhere far beyond the horizon. Elias stands there for hours after lighting it, leaning against the rusted rail, watching nothing and everything all at once. His hands are rough with salt and time, but his eyes are soft, like they've been crying slowly for years. Then, after a while, he walks back down the spiral stairs and returns to his little home tucked under the tower. Inside, everything has its place. A kettle that hums softly when lonely, a wooden chair worn into the shape of him, a quilt that still smells faintly of lavender and rain, and a notebook bound in sea blue leather resting always on the desk by the window. Every night, Elias writes in the notebook. He doesn't write poetry or stories. He writes dreams. Not his dreams. The dreams he hears when the wind presses against the glass, like someone knocking politely. Tonight, the dream he writes is short. A girl with hair like candlelight stands beneath the stars, her palms open to the sky. She is waiting, and she has forgotten why. He closes the notebook gently, as if not to wake it. The house beyond the wind is quiet, not empty, just paused. Every object here holds a memory. The chipped mug by the sink remembers laughter. The faded photograph on the mantel remembers music, and the scarf still hanging by the door remembers someone leaving and promising to return. Elias walks to the fireplace and sits, letting the warmth loosen his bones. The cat lifts her head, eyes gleaming green, then curls back into herself. Outside, the sea hums lullabies in a tongue only the moon understands. He closes his eyes, but tonight is different. Tonight, the wind is restless. It slides under the door, slips through the cracks in the walls, nudges the notebook until it flutters open again. Elias opens his eyes. The pages are turning by themselves, flipping not forward, but backward, to a page written long ago. He picks it up, and the words read, "I will come back to you. When the stars forget how to fall, when the wind learns my name again." Elias stares at the page for a long time, until the letters blur into one another. He doesn't remember writing it, but he remembers the voice. Years ago, decades maybe, someone had come to the lighthouse. A girl who arrived with storm-soaked boots and a laugh like bells dropped in a river. She had only stayed for one season, but it had been enough. They had lit the lantern together then, every evening, not because the stars needed it, but because they did. She had spoken to the sky like it was an old friend, telling it stories, singing it dreams. And then one day, without goodbye, she had gone, left behind only the scarf by the door. And a promise. "I will come back to you." Tonight, Elias walks out onto the cliff instead of going to bed. The stars are unusually bright. The lantern still burns atop the lighthouse, casting soft shadows over the waves. And then, he hears it. A voice on the wind. Just one word. Elias. Soft. Tentative. Like the first drop of rain after a long drought. He turns, heart stuttering like a forgotten melody, and stares into the darkness. There's no one there. Only the sea. Only the stars. Only the promise. But something is coming. He feels it. In the bones of the earth and in the whisper of the waves. He doesn't know when, but he knows she's near. And so he whispers back just loud enough for the wind to carry. I'm still here. The sky was different tonight. Not louder, not brighter, just aware, as if the stars had leaned in closer, listening, as if the clouds had paused in their slow journey across the sky, holding their breath. Inside the little house beneath the lighthouse, Elias did not sleep. He stood at the window, one hand resting on the worn wooden sill. The glass was cool against his forehead. The night air pressed gently against it, calm but full, like it was carrying a message not yet spoken aloud. There was something in the air tonight, something warmer than the chill that usually lived by the sea. It stirred like hope, rising quietly from the ashes of long quiet memories. Behind him, the notebook still lay open on the table. The pages shifted as the breeze pushed softly against them, fluttering like wings, not quite ready to fly. The words Elias had read earlier still lingered in the room like smoke. When the wind learns my name again. He didn't remember writing them, and yet they were written in his hand, and in a voice he hadn't heard in years. He moved slowly, closing the notebook with care, as if he were tucking away something sacred. Then, with practiced ease, he went to the hearth and placed another log on the fire. It crackled softly to life. The cat stirred briefly from her curled place on the rug, blinked up at him with disinterested eyes, and returned to her dreams. Outside, the wind began to hum something low and gentle, an old tune, familiar but unplaceable. For a long time, Elias had convinced himself she wasn't real, that the girl with candlelight in her hair had only existed in a dream, a figment conjured by solitude and the sea. He had told himself time does strange things when you live at the edge of the world. Memories fade, blend, stretch. But tonight, the wind remembered her. And if the wind remembered, then maybe she had been real after all. He went to the kitchen, filled the kettle, set out 2 cups, not because he needed them both, he hadn't needed 2 in years, but because he always had. It was a ritual, one he had never broken. When the tea was ready, he set the 2nd cup across from him at the table, the steam curling from it like a soft question. He didn't speak, just watched it gently, as if waiting for someone to reach across the table and take it. Then, from outside, something changed. The lighthouse beam flickered, just once. A soft pulse. Then it steadied again. Elias blinked. That had never happened before. With a quiet breath, he stood. Walked to the door. Opened it. The wind rushed in, not cold, not wild, but full. It wrapped around him like a breath held for too long, finally let go. He stepped out, leaving the door open behind him, and walked up the stone path that led to the lighthouse. The stones beneath his boots were slick with mist, and the grass leaned gently away as he passed, like it remembered the weight of his steps. At the top of the spiral staircase, the lantern was still glowing, steady, comforting. But something new waited beside it, a feather, small, white, and dusted with the faintest shimmer of gold. It lay on the floor near the base of the lantern, unmoved by the wind. He picked it up carefully, turning it in his fingers. It was warm, soft, and impossibly light, like it still remembered being part of something living. As his hand closed gently around it, a sound rose in the air, faint but unmistakable. Laughter, not loud or close, but familiar. He looked out across the ocean. The horizon was cloaked in night, the sea dark and still beneath the stars. The wind picked up again, and this time it wasn't whispering names or words, but a tune, a melody, a lullaby. He knew it. She had made it up here, long ago, walking barefoot along the cliffs. She used to hum it under her breath when she thought he wasn't listening. He had laughed at her once, told her the stars didn't care for songs, and she had smiled, one of those small, sad smiles, and said, "They always listen, they just don't always answer." But now, they were answering. Elias stayed up there, until the sky began to soften at the edges, until the sea began to sigh in its ancient rhythm once again. When he finally descended the stairs and returned to his house, dawn was just touching the waves. Inside, everything was just as he had left it, almost. Except for one thing, the 2nd teacup was empty, bone dry, but still warm, as if someone had been there. He said nothing, asked no questions, just stood there quietly, holding the moment like a fragile shell. Then he smiled, a soft, weary smile, and took both cups to the sink. That night, he slept deeply for the first time in years, and he dreamed of wind through her hair, of bare feet on stone, of the sound of her laugh, and of a promise glowing in the dark, like a lantern held against the wind. The morning arrived like a whisper, not with fanfare or golden light, but with a quiet hush that settled over the cliffs, the sea, and the old lighthouse like a blanket still warm from dreams. Elias woke slowly. For a long time, he stayed beneath the quilt, watching the ceiling as shadows moved softly across the beams. The fire had died down to soft embers, and the cat was curled near them, breathing steady and deep. But something inside him was different. It wasn't urgency, not excitement, just awareness, as if some part of him had turned to face the wind and finally listened. He rose quietly, moving through the house in silence. There was a stillness this morning, not the lonely kind, but the full kind, like the world was holding its breath just a little longer. He made tea, only one cup this time. He felt no sadness in that, just a quiet understanding that the second cup had already been shared. He opened the door, stepped out into the salt air, and looked toward the tower. The lantern was still. The glass shone faintly in the soft morning light. The wind had settled to a gentle breeze. Even the sea seemed to be resting. Elias walked the path to the lighthouse slowly. The grass brushed his legs like fingers remembering touch. The door creaked open, just as it always had, and waiting for him at the base of the lantern was a letter. It hadn't been there the night before. Of that he was certain. The envelope was pale blue, the kind of blue that lives only in distant skies and forgotten memories. It was sealed with wax, a small, imperfect stamp of a star pressed into the center. Elias hesitated. His fingers hovered over it for a moment, then he picked it up, holding it like something fragile. He broke the seal gently and unfolded the single sheet inside. The handwriting was delicate, like the loops of waves meeting shore. He didn't need to read the name. He already knew who it was from. If you're reading this, it means I've started to remember. Not everything, just little things. The way the sea smelled at night, the sound of your boots on the stairs, the lantern glowing in the sky like a promise. I don't know where I am, Elias, but something is pulling me back. Follow the wind. It knows where I've been. He read it again, then again. Each time the words seemed to shift, becoming less like ink and more like breath. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in the inside pocket of his coat. Then he stood there for a long while, staring out across the sea. Later that day, Elias packed a small satchel. He didn't pack much, just what he needed. The blue notebook, a pen, a flask of tea, a loaf of bread, the letter, and the feather. He didn't know where he was going, not exactly, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was meant to go somewhere. Before he left, he stood once more inside the lantern room. The tower creaked softly in the breeze. Sunlight spilled through the glass, catching the dust in golden spirals. He reached out and touched the lantern. Then, for the first time in a decade, he didn't light it. He let it rest, because this time the light wasn't needed here. As he walked away from the lighthouse, down the winding path that led through the tall grasses and into the unknown, the wind picked up again. It tugged at his coat like a child pulling on a sleeve. It didn't howl, it guided, and somewhere far ahead, beyond the cliffs and the tides, beyond where the map lines end, a girl with candlelight hair turned toward the sea and remembered his name. The path beyond the lighthouse was unfamiliar, not just to Elias, but to the earth itself. There were no footprints, no broken twigs or worn grass. It was a path the world seemed to make as he walked, like the land had been waiting quietly, holding its breath until someone remembered how to move forward. The wind was steady now, not fierce, not cold, just constant, like a thread tugging gently at his collar, guiding him not toward a destination, but a memory. He walked for hours. Time became soft at the edges, moments folding into one another, like dusk and dawn caught in an embrace. The landscape changed slowly, from salt-kissed cliffs to tall meadows, where the grasses swayed in rhythm with the wind. Birds flew silently overhead. Even they seemed to understand this journey was not meant to be interrupted. As the sun began to slip toward evening, Elias reached a grove of silver-leaved trees. They shimmered as if dipped in moonlight, even in the fading amber glow of the sun. There, in the quiet heart of the grove, stood a woman. She was old, but not weak. She wore a coat the color of twilight, and her long white hair moved like mist around her shoulders. She was barefoot, and her toes were sunk slightly into the soil, as though the ground had grown around her. She turned to face him without surprise, as though she had known he was coming for years. "You kept the light burning," she said softly. Her voice was wind, not sharp or loud, but constant. Every word felt carried on a breeze older than time. Elias nodded slowly. "I didn't know why anymore," he replied. "I just couldn't stop." The woman smiled. "That's how you know it mattered." They sat together in the clearing. She handed him a cup, though he hadn't seen her carry one. The tea was warm, fragrant, and unfamiliar. It tasted like memories he hadn't lived, sweet and strange. "You've come a long way," she said after a time. "But this part of the road doesn't need your feet. It needs your memory." He looked at her, uncertain. "But I don't remember." She reached into the folds of her coat and drew out something wrapped in cloth. It was small, square, and humming faintly with warmth. When she opened the cloth, Elias saw a mirror, but it didn't show his face. It showed the lighthouse, the lantern, and her, the girl, standing beneath the beam of golden light, barefoot, her eyes turned toward the sky. Elias leaned forward, his breath caught. "I remember that night," he whispered. "She sang to the stars." "She always did," the woman replied, "but that night they sang back." The image faded, and Elias looked away, his chest aching with something old and almost beautiful. "Why did she leave?" he asked. "Why didn't she say goodbye?" The woman smiled, but not with her lips. "She didn't leave," she said. "She was called, just like you are now." Elias looked down at his hands. They were trembling, not from fear, but from the quiet certainty that something was about to begin, or maybe had already begun. The woman rose, the wind gathered around her, not lifting her, not swallowing her, but wrapping her in its memory. "You must follow the path beyond memory," she said. "It won't be marked, but the stars will know, and when you feel lost..." She leaned closer. Her eyes, impossibly pale, met his. Listen for her voice. Then, as gently as mist leaving the morning, she was gone. Not vanished, just no longer there, as though she had stepped into another breath of time. Elias stood in the grove for a long while. The silver trees shimmered softly. The sky had deepened to lavender, the first stars blinking open one by one. And in the distance, so faint it could have been a dream, he heard her, a voice. Like bells caught in fog, she was singing. Not for him, not yet, but for the stars. Because that's where she had always lived. Between songs and sky, between silence and memory. Elias didn't sleep that night, not because he couldn't, but because sleep no longer seemed separate from waking. The world around him felt thinner now, like a page half turned or a curtain slightly drawn. He sat by the edge of the grove until the silver leaves turned pale in the starlight, and the wind shifted again, calling him forward. There was no path beneath his boots now, just open earth, soft with dew and dreaming, and yet he didn't hesitate. His steps were quiet, but steady. He moved not by sight, but by feel, guided by something old and deep inside him, something that had waited years to wake up. By dawn, the land changed. The cliffs were gone. The meadows had vanished. Before him now stretched a shoreline unlike any he had ever seen. There was no water, no tide, only a smooth, silver-gray stretch of sand that shimmered faintly as if holding starlight just below the surface. Above him the sky pulsed with soft movement, not clouds, not storms, but memories, drifting, glowing, dissolving, like watching someone else's dreams painted across the heavens. Elias stepped onto the silver sand. It gave slightly beneath his boots, like walking across velvet. There were no waves, no birds, no sound at all, just the soft hush of nothing, wrapping around him like a comforting silence. And yet it didn't feel empty. The air was thick with presence. Not people, not creatures, but stories. They pulsed just beneath the surface, like voices waiting to be heard, like words waiting to be spoken. He took a few more steps and then stopped, because in front of him, rising from the sand like a monument carved from stardust, stood a door, a single wooden door, familiar, weathered, painted sea blue. He knew that door. It was from the lighthouse, the back door, the one she had walked through on her last morning, the one she had never returned through. His throat tightened. He stepped forward and placed his hand on the handle. It was warm. He hesitated for only a moment, then pulled it open. Behind the door was not a room, not the lighthouse, not anything he expected. It opened onto a staircase, spiraling downward, made of light. The steps shimmered beneath his boots but held firm as he began to descend. Down and down he went, deeper than seemed possible. The deeper he went, the more the wind softened. Not gone, just quieter, as if it was holding its breath again. Finally, the staircase ended, and Elias found himself standing in a vast open space, a chamber of stars, but not the sky. These stars floated beside him, beneath him, around him, tiny glowing motes of memory. Each one flickered with a life once lived. He saw moments, laughter echoing across water, a child spinning beneath snowfall, a firelit kiss under a wooden roof, his own memories, and memories that weren't his, all gently drifting weightless in the stillness. And then he saw her. Not fully, just a shape, a silhouette formed from light and memory, standing at the far end of the chamber. She turned slowly. Her hair caught the glow of nearby stars, flames of gold trailing behind her. No words passed between them. None were needed. He took a step forward. So did she. They stood there, inches apart, breathing the same starlit air. Her eyes held the storm and the silence, joy and goodbye. Questions and answers folded into each other. Finally, she spoke, soft, steady, like the wind had lent her its voice. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because the stars called me to remember, and now, I've remembered you. Elias felt his chest loosen, as if something that had been locked away for too long was finally allowed to move. He reached out, and so did she. Their hands touched, not like hands, more like memories. Two stories meeting at their shared ending, or maybe their beginning. Around them, the stars pulsed brighter, not in noise, but in meaning. The chamber warmed, the silence filled with music only the soul could hear. He didn't need to ask if she was staying. He didn't need to know where she had been. Somewhere between then and now, those questions had become irrelevant. They were here, now, together. She leaned close, her forehead resting gently against his, and in a voice that barely needed sound, she whispered, "You kept the light burning, even when no one asked you to. That's how I found my way back." Elias closed his eyes, and for the first time in all his years, he let go. Not of her, not of memory, but of the ache, the waiting, the wondering. He let it all drift, like stars no longer falling, but rising. Elias didn't remember leaving the Chamber of Stars, not in the way one remembers walking through a door or down a path. It felt more like waking from a dream that had become too real to stay inside. One moment he was standing beside her in that great silent place of memory. The next he was back on the silver shore, the sealess expanse of glowing sand that stretched out beneath the quiet sky. Only now, the door behind him was gone. The sand was still, untouched. The wind had quieted to something almost sacred, as if holding the final note of a lullaby. In his hands, he held a lantern. Not the one from the lighthouse. This one was smaller, lighter, made of glass that shimmered faintly like stardust, with a flame inside that didn't flicker, but pulsed gently with every beat of his heart. He didn't remember picking it up, and yet it felt right, familiar, as though he had always been meant to carry it. He turned slowly, taking in the landscape, and began to walk. The way forward had become clear, though no signs marked his path. The silver shore gave way to tall grasses once again, swaying in rhythms he could now hear, not as wind, but as song. The world was quieter now, not because it had fallen silent, but because it had been listened to. He walked until the land remembered him. The lighthouse appeared first on the horizon, a silhouette against the soft glow of approaching dusk. Its outline was exactly as he had left it, yet everything about it felt different, not changed, but awakened. The windows caught the last light of day, like they'd been waiting for his return. As he climbed the familiar stone path, the grasses bent gently aside. The sea whispered below the cliffs, and the wind, warm and sure, followed him like an old friend. At the door, Elias paused. The cat was there, watching. She blinked once and turned without fuss, leading him back into the house where everything was just as he'd left it. The kettle on the hook, the empty teacups, the blue notebook still resting open on the table. He placed the new lantern in the center of the room. Its light was soft, but filled every corner, not demanding attention, but offering comfort. And then something strange and beautiful happened. The old lighthouse lantern, up in the tower, flickered to life on its own. Elias didn't move. He didn't need to. Somehow the light had returned, not by duty, not by habit, but because it had followed him back. The light had learned to carry itself. That night, Elias sat at the window, the small lantern by his side, casting golden reflections onto the glass. He didn't write in the notebook. He didn't speak aloud. He simply watched the stars return, blinking gently across the sky like old companions. He could still feel her presence, not hovering, not haunting, but settled into the very air he breathed. He no longer needed to ask where she had gone. Some part of her had always been here, in the wind, in the waiting, in the light. As the fire settled low and the cat curled once more by the hearth, Elias stood slowly and turned out the lamps. The only light left was the one inside the new lantern, quiet, steady, eternal. And as he climbed into bed, the stars above whispered a soft goodnight, not because he needed them to, but because they wanted to. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. Elias moved through them, like a man learning to breathe a different kind of air. He still lit the fire each morning, still poured his tea into the familiar cup, still climbed the lighthouse stairs to check the beam, but everything he touched now carried a different weight, not heavier, lighter somehow, as if the silence itself had grown warmer. The small lantern, the one he'd brought back from the shore of memory, remained in the center of his table. He didn't need to tend it. Its flame didn't burn down. It glowed constantly, gently, pulsing like the sea against the rocks far below. It became part of the house, part of the rhythm. Some nights, when he woke in the dark, it was the first thing he saw, a steady, quiet heart in the center of the room. It was 3 days after his return when the knock came. Not loud, not urgent, just a single, deliberate knock against the old wooden door. Elias paused, unsure if he'd imagined it. No one came here, no one had come in years. He waited. Another knock, then silence. He opened the door slowly, cautiously, and there, standing just beyond the threshold, was a girl. She looked no older than 20, wrapped in a patchwork coat and boots too big for her feet. Her hair was the color of storm-soaked earth, wild with wind. She didn't flinch when she saw him. In fact, she looked like she'd been expecting him. "I dreamed of this place," she said softly. "I followed the light." Elias didn't speak. He stepped aside, and she entered without hesitation. She stood in the center of the room, her eyes drawn immediately to the small lantern on the table. Her expression didn't shift into awe or wonder. She simply nodded, as if recognizing something she hadn't seen since childhood. "You've been carrying it," she said. Elias finally found his voice. "I didn't know I was." She smiled. "Most don't, until they do." He gestured for her to sit, made her tea without asking how she liked it. She accepted it with both hands, as though it was the first warm thing she'd held in days. They spoke little. She offered no name, and he didn't ask. Some meetings don't require introductions. She told him only this. She had been walking for weeks, no destination, just following something she couldn't quite name. A dream, perhaps, or a memory that didn't belong to her. He understood that feeling more than she could know. She slept in the chair by the fire that night, curled up like someone who had walked too long in the dark and finally found a patch of light worth resting in. Elias sat by the window, the stars rising slowly outside. The cat climbed into his lap without ceremony. And the lantern burned, as it always did, soft and sure. In the morning, she helped him light the tower. Her hands were steady. She didn't ask what to do. She simply moved as though the memory had been waiting in her fingers all along. When the beam lit the sky, she didn't smile, but her eyes softened, and her shoulders fell from their constant guard. Later, she stood at the edge of the cliff, her coat pulled tightly around her. The wind tugged at her hair like a whisper. "There are more of us, aren't there?" she asked quietly. Elias nodded. "I think there always have been." She turned to him. "Do you think they'll find the light?" He looked out at the horizon, then back at her. "I think they already are." And she nodded. Because sometimes the light we carry isn't meant to keep us warm. Sometimes it's meant to be seen by someone else. Someone lost, someone wandering, someone quietly hoping that somewhere out there a window is glowing and a door is waiting to open. The girl stayed for 3 more days. She didn't ask to stay, and Elias never offered. It simply made sense, like the rhythm of tides or the turning of the moon. There was no need for plans. She helped with the tea, fed the cat, and walked barefoot around the lighthouse as though each stone remembered her. In the evenings, they sat beside the small lantern on the table. Its light never dimmed. It pulsed gently, steady as breath. It had become the heart of the house, quiet, golden, patient. On the second night, the girl finally told him about the dream. "I was walking through a forest made of glass," she said. "And above me, the sky was full of stars. But they were falling, not like shooting stars. More like they were being let go, one by one, drifting down like feathers." She paused, as if remembering the details. and each one that touched the ground became a voice, whispering. Not loud, not scary, just reminding me of something I hadn't learned yet. And in the middle of it all, there was this light, not the brightest, but the only one that didn't move. It stood still, waiting. Elias listened quietly. She wasn't asking for answers, she just needed someone to hear it. When I woke up, she said, I knew I had to walk. I didn't know where, but I followed that stillness, and it brought me here. They sat in silence after that, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Outside, the sea pressed against the cliffs. The lighthouse beam turned slowly, sweeping across the water like a soft hand brushing away the dark. On the fourth morning, she stood at the cliff's edge again. Her boots were tied, her coat buttoned. Elias watched her from the doorway, the cat brushing past his leg without care. I think it's time, she said. Elias nodded. He didn't ask where she was going. He already knew, not the place, but the reason. She turned to face him. The light you kept. It's not meant to stay in one place anymore. He looked past her toward the horizon, where the sky met the water in a thin line of silver. It was never mine to keep, he said. She smiled. No, but you kept it anyway. And because you did, I found it. Others will too. She reached into her coat and drew something small and wrapped in cloth. Handing it to him, she said, You'll know what to do. Then she turned and walked down the path, slowly, deliberately, until the tall grass swallowed her shape. The wind followed her gently, not pushing, just accompanying, a companion rather than a force. Elias stood there for a long moment. Then he unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a second lantern, smaller than the one on his table, shaped differently. This one looked like it had been crafted from the inside of a seashell, iridescent, curved, impossibly delicate. It glowed faintly, not yet lit, but it was warm in his hand. He looked toward the lighthouse, then back at the open land. There was no ache in his chest, no sense of ending, only a quiet awareness something had begun. That night, Elias walked up to the lantern room for the last time. He didn't light the old beam. Instead, he placed the small, glowing lantern on the railing at the edge, facing the sea. Its soft light shimmered in the night air, untouched by wind or fog. A beacon not for ships, but for souls. Not to warn, but to welcome. And down below, on the table inside the house, the first lantern still burned. Calm, still. Elias didn't disappear. He stayed in the lighthouse. He fed the cat, wrote in the blue notebook, lit a small fire each morning and watched it burn into the quiet of the room. But people began to arrive. Not many, just one at a time. Sometimes they came from the woods, sometimes from the cliffs. Sometimes they didn't remember how they'd gotten there at all. They always arrived quietly. They always found the light. And when they were ready, they left again, each carrying a lantern, each walking a path only they could see. Years passed, but Elias did not age in the way the world understood aging. His eyes stayed clear, his steps remained steady, because he was no longer waiting. He was keeping something alive, not the light, exactly, but the promise beneath it. A promise that no one is ever truly lost, not forever, not if someone remembers to keep a lantern burning in the dark. One evening, long after the stars had begun to rise, Elias stood at the edge of the cliff, his coat wrapped around him, the wind brushing against his face like an old friend. In his hand, he held one final lantern, smooth, simple, steady. He turned once toward the lighthouse. The cat sat at the window, watching, waiting, as always. He smiled. Then he turned back toward the sea, stepped beyond the grass, and walked slowly into the wind. The lantern's light did not flicker. It simply moved forward, and the stars above burned just a little brighter.